Phronesis. Practical Wisdom with Scott Allen.
Hello, I am Scott Allen, and thanks to my daughter Kate for developing the intro to the Practical Wisdom for Leaders podcast, where we offer a smart, fast-paced discussion on all things leadership. My guests help us explore timely topics and incorporate practical tips to help you make a difference in how you lead and live. If you haven't done so, please click subscribe so you automatically, seamlessly stay in the know when we publish new episodes. Likewise, please provide me with feedback. What do you like? What do you dislike? And what else would you like to know? And now, today's show. Happy New Year, everybody, and welcome to Phronesis. We have an exciting conversation to have today with Ron Riggio. He is our first repeat guest, and I just looked at the analytics, and he's actually the most downloaded guest that we've had since we started in April. So Ron has published a new book, and it is called Daily Leadership Development, 365 Steps to Becoming a Better Leader. So I thought, why not? What a great time. It's the new year. It's 2021. We're turning the page. And how do we think about leadership development in this new year? So Ron, how are you, sir?
I'm good, and Happy New Year, Scott.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, take us through the book. I mean, this is an undertaking. This is 365 suggestions to be. That's intense. That's awesome. I love it. Tell us about it.
Yeah, well, it was a bit of work. But actually, the new year is probably a good time to talk about this because one of the ways you can think about it is a New Year's resolution.
Yeah.
And we know that one of the problems or one of the issues with New Year's resolutions is that they're really hard to keep, right? So we say we're going to lose 10 pounds or we're going to, change this part, exercise, weekly or whatever, and we're unable to do it. And so just like that, just like any New Year's resolution, this would be a good time to think about your leader development, your personal leader development. And that was kind of the idea. And so the idea was, what could you do when you wake up or when you go to bed for 5 minutes that could help develop your leadership step by step, right? And we know that we don't have a whole lot of time to do this. And so the idea is, what could we do in terms of small, daily, sort of bite-sized chunks of leader development?
I love it. Well, it makes me think, I just finished, Jay Conger actually had recommended that I read Atomic Habits. So I don't know if you've had a chance to read the James Clear book, Atomic Habits. Have you read it yet?
No, I have not.
But it's very much in line with some of his thinking about these very small changes in behavior, changes that you almost can't fail at, are what builds upon one another into better habits long term. And he has a really beautiful biology example that I'm not going to be able to repeat right now, but I think it's something similar here. It's, look, if every day I'm going to this, it's not going to take me 20 minutes or 30 minutes or an hour. It's 5-7 minutes. I'm keeping this topic top of mind for me, and it keeps it on our radar, right?
Yeah, and that's the idea. And you don't have to do it on a daily basis, too, because it's broken down into weeks. And so there's a topic for each week. And some of the larger topics extend more than 1 week. But, so the book sort of starts out and says, you've got to commit to this. You've got to motivate yourself. This is a journey, not a destination. And and it follows on through to that. And so another way to look at it, another way that I thought about it is that it doesn't even have to be a year. This could be something that you could go back throughout your leadership career, because the last few weeks are really about kind of thinking about the end of leadership, or the end of your leadership in terms of what's your leadership legacy, right? That's the week 50. What's your leadership legacy? There's also information on here about, how should a leader think about retirement? How should a leader think about the next generation of leaders? So you can sort of see it as a year, or you can see it as kind of your whole lifetime. And the hope is that this is the kind of book that you'd leave on the nightstand, and pick it up in the morning, read a little bit, and then eventually go back to it too.
Tell us about how long did this take you? This is a big project.
Well, the writing itself took a few years, but I really, it actually was the COVID lockdown that got me to finally do that final push and get it all done. Is I didn't really I'd sort of cleared other projects, and we locked down and got done with classes in May, and I pretty much worked on it through August and pulled it all together. It's actually based, though, the kind of concept came to me with a book that I, sort of keep around, right? Keep it right here on my desk, The Daily Drucker, because, I knew Peter Drucker here in Claremont. And this is day by day reading, 365 readings of, some of Peter Drucker's pearls of wisdom. And I'm hoping that this could be the same thing. This is a little more organized and integrated and follows kind of a progression of leader development, but you can still jump around, go back to earlier parts or skip ahead if you want to.
Yeah. Well, you told us about even some of the later weeks, right? It might be end of career, transitioning. What are some of the other themes that you explore in the content of the book?
Well, I tried to be comprehensive. I told my daughter helped me with proofreading and editing, and then she sort of became my publicist, a real publicist. And she sort of said, "Gosh, what's in here?" And I said, "Essentially everything I know." Right? So, I've taught IO psychology, I've taught management, leadership courses, and all that. And so embedded in here is kind of a quick overview of what I think are exemplary leadership theories. So there's a week on transformational leadership. There's a little bit about leader relationships that kind of has some LMX in there. But then even going to kind of the OB level, there's a couple of weeks on what leaders need to know about human resources issues. So human resources from the leader's perspective. A couple weeks on organizational politics from the leader's perspective. Lots of stuff on communication, for example.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of practical stuff. There's toolkits throughout. At the end is near the end is sort of the advanced toolkit, and the basic toolkits are in the front. There's leadership. The one I like is leadership lessons, which actually covers 2 weeks. So leadership lessons from everywhere. And
really?
Yeah, and part of it is, there's some really interesting books out there. So, there was one that I remember reviewing a long time ago, Leadership Lessons from the Navy SEALs, but I kind of put that together, leadership lessons from the military, leadership lessons from, I did a paper with Nick Warner. You might know Nick Warner.
I don't know Nick, no.
Yeah, he's sort of a film studies guy. And we did one on essentially leadership lessons from The Godfather, from the movie The Godfather. So what are the good and the bad lessons that you learned from that? So there's some kind of fun stuff in there. But most of it's, kind of serious leader development. And the idea is that if you finish the book and you're really paying attention, you'll know quite a bit about leadership theories. You'll know quite a bit about the tools and how to lead. And you'll have a pretty good grounding in just management and just the field of management. So, I tried to kind of put my courses into this too in little, in a light level.
Well, and what I like about it, you mentioned, hey, you're going to learn about leadership theory, but this isn't an academic. The tone is not academic. It's very, very user friendly. It's very accessible for really anyone at any level, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, that was the idea. I mean, part of the idea too was I was thinking about our graduates here, right? So we're liberal arts undergraduate college, and the students go off, and I thought, what can I give them to take with them? And
wow.
So we're giving all of our seniors a copy. And the idea is, don't leave it here. You're going to get a job. You're going to end up in a leadership position. So don't stop developing, because one of the things we do here at the Kravis Leadership Institute is we develop the next generation of leaders. And, but the problem is once they graduate, who knows where they go? It's scattered to the four winds.
Yeah. I love that you're giving it away as a gift. That's wonderful.
Yeah,
It really is, because again, if people are embracing that thinking around using this as a reference, like you literally just picked up the Drucker book, right? And showed it to me as we're recording right now. And it's right there. And if this is that resource from a leadership perspective, I think what an incredible value. What an incredible value. And what a great gift to give these seniors as they move on to begin their career.
yeah. And that was kind of the idea, keep, and actually the very last entry is keep in touch. So one of the things that I'm doing is, and I have a blog on Psychology Today, and some of these, many of the entries were inspired by the blog. So I took the blog posts sometimes and reformatted them. But the last one says, stay in touch with me. So I continue to put up new lessons on my blog post. My daughter set up a website, riggioleadership.org. And there's resources there. And in fact, in the book, there are some assessments too. I didn't mention the assessments. And some of them are bigger. So you have to go to the riggioleadership.org website to do the assessments, take the assessment.
Yeah.
And we'll be adding those as we kind of go along.
Well, even as I look at the contents, you've got good leadership, ethical leadership, leader qualities, complex leadership, teams. More leadership in teams. That's a big topic, right? Yeah. Even more on leadership in teams.
I think there's 2 weeks on bad leadership. There's a lot of bad leaders out there. But.
You did. There's toxic cultures, toxic leaders. Yes.
Yeah. And in fact, when you get to the end of that, then it goes into good leadership, because I think after I wrote those 2 weeks, I was a little depressed. And so then I decided, let's focus on, we're talking about what are the lessons we learn to avoid from bad leaders, but then how can we move that forward in kind of then the next chapter or the next week is good leadership, and then ethical leadership, which takes it even to the higher level.
If you think about what you have in here, is there anything that you've left out? Is there anything upon retrospect, or I imagine that's going up on the website, but is this literally everything, Ron?
So I had, I sent a copy to someone and I've got to give her a shout out, and you've had her on your program, Susan Comavez.
Yes.
I sent it to her and I said, what do you think? Because I really respect her work. And she essentially almost line by line edited it, and made suggestions. Put an enormous amount of work in. I almost should have given her a co-authorship on it. But she said and of course, this is her area. She said, I probably should have done more on leadership and change. And there are a couple of things on leadership and change, but she thought that there should be more. And so that's one of the things I'm looking at. The other thing, I do have a couple of weeks on issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. But that's a tough area, and there's, very complicated. And so I probably could do some more on that. And there's always new things coming out too. So that's why I'll sort of continue it. And I've actually thought about, I got to rest a little bit from the work, but at some point, revising it.
Yeah.
And updating.
So can we move from the book for just a moment and talk about kind of a continuation of some of our conversations from our first podcast?
Sure.
Can we do that, Ron?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I've asked this of a couple people now. I've asked this question of, I interviewed Emilio Iodice. Emilio has a book right now called Commander in Chief, and he has really worked in a few different administrations, been right there at the forefront of all of what's happening. And so we had a very interesting conversation. I asked Mary Olbein the same question. And now I'd love to hear your perspectives. What does President-elect Biden need to do to move past some of all of the challenges that are inherently baked into the role he's about to assume? You have, of course, some of the, I don't even need to go into it. We know the status that we're at.
Yeah.
So as you think about that leadership challenge, if Biden's folks came to you and said, "Hey, Ron, what do we need to do here?" Yeah. What are some things that come to mind for you about how to think about that?
Yeah, that's actually an easy one, because I've done a lot of thinking about this. And I think the number one issue is the divisiveness. And so how work on overcoming that divisiveness. And
Yeah.
and you see him already doing that. I mean, even in his speeches, he says, "I'm as much a president for the people who didn't vote for me as the people who did vote for me." And he's echoing, President Obama, who said, "I'm the president for all people," right?
Yeah.
And that's the critical thing, because the divisiveness, and you can see it. I mean, all the other problems are hampered, and extremely hampered by that divisiveness. So we can't muster a good defense against the pandemic, because people don't believe there's two sides. There, I mean, right now we call them the maskers and the anti-maskers, but
Yeah.
it really is about coming together and agreeing that we have a superordinate goal. And I use that term because I was trained as a social psychologist. And the idea is, when you have divisiveness, you get this bias, this in-group, out-group bias. We're the good
Yeah.
guys. We know what's going on. You guys are the bad guys. You're the out-group. And we know this from early social psychological studies of in-group, out-group bias, that the only way you can get people to pull together is to find that superordinate goal that both sides can agree upon, and then work toward. And
Yeah.
we aren't going to solve any problems unless we come together.
So what might a superordinate goal be that we can find common ground on?
Well, I mean, you would think the pandemic would be one, and so there's, so I think having consistent messaging. Yeah, I mean, look at what's happened is we've lost faith in science. And,
Mm.
Science is what's keeping us alive and together in many ways. I mean, the greatest advancements in terms of longevity are due to scientific discoveries.
Yeah.
Technology comes from science. I mean, the fact that we're even able to do this, being thousands of miles apart, is
Yep.
due to, but there's a mistrust of science now,
Yeah.
and that's problematic. So,
Interesting, because it's like a selective mistrust.
yeah,
I'm gonna benefit from the cancer treatment, and that was science, and by gosh, I'll take that. But again, some of these issues like masks or some other, you can go to climate, you can go to that whole conversation, but it's almost as if we selectively choose which pieces of science fit our paradigm and which don't.
yeah.
Right?
Yeah, you're exactly right, and that's the problem, right? And instead of seeing it as, we have to agree on certain things, and I know that we don't talk about facts. We talk, when we're talking about like social science, we don't say it's proven, but
Yeah.
there's support for this, that this is the best course of action in a
Yeah.
particular instance, and there's always going to be exceptions, but we have to agree on this. I mean, I think if we look at kind of what's happening, I mean, we've got weather issues right now, a lot of it because of climate change. And there's another good example where there are people who are climate change deniers. And until we can pull together and say, look, we got to do something about this, and there's some agreement, we're not going to solve that problem. And that problem's going to kill us, just like the pandemic is going to kill a number of us.
Yeah.
People are going to lose their lives due to weather incidents, to the changing climate.
Yep. Anything else come to mind of what he
Well,
needs to focus on?
Well, I mean, I think the other thing that one thing is we've got to really work on preserving our democracy. I mean, I think the challenges that have come to our democratic institutions just in this last administration is that we've got to restore that, because we've got to we've got to accept the fact that we have a system where the majority rules, and there's going to be an unhappy minority, but the minority has to say, look, we're going to go along with you out of this sense of unity.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't always be divided.
Yeah. Well, and I think what you're tapping into is, which is so important, is even shared agreement on some of the most basic fundamentals that have been assumed for decades. right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just
And not perfect. By no means are any of those things perfect. Has an election ever been perfect? No. But, when the Supreme Court, through the Republican Attorney General, through the frontline poll worker, has said it was in order, generally speaking, it's in order,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
Well, there are things we're going to like and things that we don't like, but we have to come together. We have to adhere to rules, regulations, laws, I mean, or else there's chaos.
Mhm.
So I think that's the biggest issue. And to be honest, when people dig in their heels and refuse to listen to reasonable arguments, I don't know how to solve that. I mean, I think underneath it all is that, I'm in a liberal arts college. So one of the things that we try to do here, and why I think liberal arts is a little different, is we really try to instill critical thinking
Yeah.
in our students. And I think that everybody needs a really good dose of critical thinking ability. They need to not just take things at face value, not just listen to one stream of news, whether it's right wing laced or left wing laced. I think they're both problematic. You
Yes.
got to look at it and try to get some objectivity, take in different sides of information, and come up with a conclusion that's based on critical thinking and not just based on because they said something that I liked or something that agrees with my belief system.
Yeah. Because ultimately there's going to be debate. So what I always say to my students is, I want you to be able to argue both sides. And once you can come up with an argument on both sides of whatever the issue is, ultimately then your values take over, and what it is you value is where potentially you land. But make that an intentional process.
Right.
Again, to your point, don't just consume what the left or the right, the storyline, the narrative that they're sharing. Have you explored all of it?
Yeah.
And really truly work to explore it. And then where you end up on what you value is where you end. But I think to the confirmation bias, right?
Yeah.
Me just going to be fed my bias, it's toxic.
Yeah, it's really interesting because that, I think, is a lot of the problem, the sort of inherent biases that we have. So some of the issues are probably more hardwired, evolutionary. The in-group out-group bias, for example, is probably comes from our evolutionary roots, right?
Yeah.
That people who are different, we feared them because they could potentially harm us.
Yeah.
And so there's some root to that. A lot of the other ones, I think, come out of our social processes, but we have to be aware of those. I have a colleague right now who's working on an instrument to measure your sort of proneness to cognitive biases.
Oh, wow.
I thought, wow, that's a really great thing, because what it's going to tell you is this person going to be easily swayed by these biases? Are they going to be trapped by their own cognitive biases? And he's actually in sort of the personnel world, because he's saying, well, you don't want people like that in your workplace, right? If they're
Yeah.
because obviously it leads to discrimination and all other kinds of problems and lack of creative thinking. But I think that's a really important thing, is we've got to learn to overcome these sort of human tendencies that lead us down the wrong path.
It makes me think even of, obviously there's some of the classic experiments, but I think of the brown-eyed, blue-eyed. Was that Nebraska or Iowa? The school teacher.
That's the classic in-group out-group bias. I mean, she just picked eye color. And what's interesting is, I think it was the next day or maybe a couple days later, she flipped it around, and
and they believed it.
Yeah, I mean, so that she argued one side, they bought it hook, line, and sinker. The next day she argued the other side, they bought it hook, line, and sinker, right? And that just shows you how, that just shows you how malleable we are, how powerful these biases are. And we have to stop ourselves and say, that doesn't make any sense. How could you know?
Anything else come to mind on advice for Joe Biden?
I mean, I think the other thing is about inclusion, right? And so he has to be inclusive. He has to, have a diverse set of advisors. I mean, this is just kind of common sense. You get into it. It's very difficult. I mean, politics is really tough because you you've got to stay in the position. You've got to you can't turn everybody off all at once, and so I know you have to tread very lightly. And in fact, that's the issue too with organizational politics. And like I said, there's 2 weeks on organizational politics simply because it takes so long to even just explain. What do we mean by politics? What are the problems, the pitfalls, how, what's good about politics, because it's not all bad. It's neither good nor bad. It's just a process. We want to further our own ends. Robert Hogan, he one time we were talking about leadership and he said, it's really simple. There's 2 things that leaders need to do. They need to get ahead and they need to get along.
Wow.
And, and the get ahead is the political thing, right? The idea of I want to further my own ends. I want to get promoted. I want to have the things that I want. I want to achieve my goals. But you got to get along while you get ahead, right? Yeah. So you can't, do it by stepping on other people as you climb your way to the top, right? I mean, you have to get along. So there.
At least that's not a sustainable approach.
Yeah. No. It's the problem is this, Scott. You kind of know this. I mean, I'd like to make a big deal out of this. Is we often, when it comes to leadership or teams or groups, we equate effectiveness with being good.
Yeah.
And you can be effective and be a bad leader. You can do terrible things. You can do terrible damage. So we want to be effective and we want to be good. And when I think good, I don't want to get into the sort of, we don't want to have sort of religious moral overtones, but we mean being a good person, being a person of a trustworthy person of good character. So it really comes down to that.
Yep. Ron, other than daily leadership development, 365 steps to becoming a better leader, what are a couple resources that are seminal resources when it comes to this topic of leadership for you? What would 2 or 3 pieces of work that I can put in the show notes that people could also prioritize for the coming year?
Yeah, well, I really think that that a big issue right now is the inclusiveness. And so I'm going to recommend, Stephanie Johnson's Inclusify. I think you might have had Stephanie. Have you had Steph on your program?
We did. And actually she spoke in my class last night. We read her book as a part of my class. And then she Zoomed in from Boulder, Colorado last night. So it was a great conversation. Yeah. We discussed the Boy Scouts for a long, long time. And it was a really interesting conversation. Because they are moving through this transition of trying to be inclusive of young girls and women, and how they navigate that and not ostracize the decades of Eagle Scouts, but advance the organization. And then even once they do become more inclusive, are they actually inclusive? Do young women feel welcomed and like they belong? So it was it's a great book too. My students loved it. It was a great book. So I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah. So that's one resource. There are so many, you were thinking about politics. Jerry Ferris sent me this recently, Political Skill at Work. And I'm only partway through it. Now it's a little, and it's accessible. I mean, it's written at a level that, that most of your listeners would could grasp it. It has, it's based on research. A lot of the stuff I read is much more technical. I keep Bass's handbook, right there where I can grab it, but I don't think Bass's handbook is.
That's a little thick, Ron. Yes. I think I have it back here as well.
Yeah. So
you were involved in that last version, weren't you?
well, I mean, I helped Ruth, because Bernie unfortunately passed before it came out. So I helped a little bit. I helped with being a resource for Ruth as she pulled the last pieces together. But
he said something that will forever stick with me when I first met him. And I know that you knew him well and wrote with him, but we were at a conference. We were at the Gallup Leadership Institute. I think Bruce Avolio was at University of Nebraska, and they had a couple conferences for a few years. And I met Bernie Bass, and I said, "How have you stayed prolific for all of these years?" And he said something to the effect of, 2 pages a day adds up.
We could have a whole conversation about
We
Bernie,
should,
because he was really a remarkable guy. And but I used to go with him to conferences, and he would. If you look at the handbook, he cites conference papers. He was like a sponge. He just grabbed whatever he could. I remember him just grabbing reprints and talking to people, and I had a hard time keeping up with him, even though I was 20 years younger than he was. So.
Oh, that's great. Well, Ron, as always, thank you, sir, for the work that you do. Thank you for the time today.
Yeah.
I hope you have a wonderful 2021.
Yes, you too.
And I really appreciate all you do.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Scott. And I appreciate your podcast.
Okay. Be well.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
I really hope you enjoyed that conversation. It's always so much fun to catch up with Ron Riggio. And I think the practical wisdom here is that it's an ongoing developmental process each and every day. And that's why I love the idea behind his current work. And the first passage in this book says leadership is about character. That's the foundation. I had a great conversation with Craig Johnson about that very topic. Leadership is about character. So it's ongoing. I don't know that any one of us are ever finished. And I think Ron's approach of a little bit every day will add up. For those of you who listen consistently to the podcast, the name James Clear has come up a few different times. Those little shifts, those little adjustments that really do add up. Happy New Year, everybody. Be well, take care, and here's to an exciting and awesome 2021. You have been listening to the Practical Wisdom for Leaders podcast. If you liked what you heard, please share it with others and let them know what we're up to. And one last quick reminder to click subscribe so you know when we publish new episodes. And of course, we'd love to hear your feedback. You can stay in touch with me by visiting www.scottjallen.net or any number of social media platforms. Be well, be safe, and make a difference wherever you are on this beautiful planet. And now, here's Kate's twin sister, Emily, with the outro.
You've been listening to Phronesis, Practical Wisdom with Scott Allen.